I think I'm going to go ahead and get started, and people can keep drifting in. We feel so lucky that on this holiday weekend we have such a rock star speaker. I know most of you already know all about him and don't need this introduction, but I feel like all of my high school debate training says I'm supposed to give a formal introduction, so I'm going to do that. Dr. Ved Nanda is a distinguished professor of law at the University of Denver, where he founded the International Legal Studies program in 1972, and now directs the Ved Nanda Center for International and Comparative Law. Professor Nanda holds many leadership positions in the global international law community. He has served as U.S. delegate to the World Federation of the United Nations Associations in Geneva and on the Governing Council of the United Nations Association of the USA. He's received numerous national and international awards, has authored or co-authored 24 books and over 225 chapters of law or law review articles. He writes a column for the Denver Post. Don't believe that for a second, including in today's paper. So make sure if you didn't see it before church, go home and read his column in the Post today. And he's a regular commentator in both electronic and print media. Please welcome back Dr. Nanda and give him a warm welcome.
Simply want you to know that this is a place where every time I come, I feel uplifted. And I learned from you because I share my thoughts, but then some of your suggestions, some of your comments, they always have been enlightening. And they always have been far-sighted. So thank you very, very much. I'm deeply honored, privileged to be here today. And it has been too long because with the COVID, haven't had the opportunity to be here. And today, as I look around, I have so many esteemed colleagues here, and I deeply appreciate their being here. And I hope that later on, after we are finished, I can say hello to them. Unfortunately, just before the COVID, I had back surgery. And my right leg is not functioning very well. But that doesn't stop me from doing what I need to do. So I'm deeply grateful again to have you here with me. You have seen this propaganda that I gave. So kindly just simply glance at it. I may not follow it fully, but at the same time, you'll at least know what I intend to do. And I intend to do a couple things here. One is that I want to look at where we are today. I want to see why it happened, what happened, and what its implications are. Because Putin's unprovoked war, his aggression, it violated all the basic fundamental norms of world order and international law. And then I do want to look at why he did it. And obviously his motives, we don't know, but at the same time we can speculate on what he has said, what he has written, and based upon that at least come to some kind of understanding of his own mind. We are not mind readers, but at least we can see what he might have been thinking about while he did it. The reasons that he gave were totally unfounded, and I'll talk about them. And then I'm looking at the possibility of war crimes, crimes against humanity, and what tribunals can try them, who can be tried, can Putin be indicted? And after looking at all that, I would like to finally see where we are heading. So that's the outline. And very briefly, I'll touch upon these things. The reason why I say that briefly is that many of you probably know and follow Ukraine and the war even better than I do. And all of you have probably ideas and thoughts. I'll share mine, but I like to hear from you. And so what I'll do today is maybe take about 20, 30 minutes to say these things, and then we can move on to having your comments. Where are we today? We are in a setting where Putin thought that within 24 to 48 hours, he'll have Kyiv under control, he'll have toppled the current regime, he'll be able to install a regime that's not only favorable to him, but a regime that is kind of a puppet regime for him. And he had all those miscalculations. He had thought in his own mind that the war would not take long, and in any event, today where we are is that north, east, south, where he began all this journey, everywhere at the present time, amazingly, to my utter surprise, and I was wrong, I did not think that Ukraine could have counteroffensive that is going to be successful, but they have been doing that. But I think missiles and now shells from Russia in Ukraine, they have caused a great deal of havoc. I think the toll, both economic and in human terms, for Ukraine is pretty, at the present time, excessive and hurtful. 25% of Kyiv at the present time has no electricity. Putin had to retreat. And from Kherson, the city that he had taken, and he has been shelling that city for the last several days. And at the present time, there is no electricity, no water. And in Kyiv, snow is falling. In Ukraine, this cold weather is going to take its own toll. And so at the present time, Ukraine is suffering. Millions at the present time uprooted, many out in other countries, and its own economic and political life is totally shattered at the present time. But Ukraine is defiant. Ukraine has simply given a very clear signal to Putin: you cannot conquer us. We have an identity, and that identity is very special to us. At the present time, European Union, it has now announced Russia as state sponsor of terrorism. As I talked about Kherson, 54 times over the weekend it has been shelled. And if you think about Putin, he again said recently, he said, I have no regrets starting this war. On the east front, where Russia has been making some progress, it's pretty slow. And in the north, in the south, at the present time with that counteroffensive, you can see that Ukraine has got an upper hand. It's not over. This is the 10th month that has begun. And yesterday was the 90th anniversary when Stalin is the one that created famine, and famine that caused hundreds of thousands of lives in Ukraine. So that is the present setting. Putin claimed that people of Russian origin and Russian ethnic group, that there is a genocide against them by Ukraine. Putin said there are Nazis and Nazi movement, and he has got to do denazification. And in Russia, there was a call not only denazification, but de-Ukrainianism. And so at the present time, claim on genocide, claim that Ukraine might get nuclear weapons, claim also that Ukraine is going to be part of NATO, and NATO is now coming to Putin's door, and NATO's expansion is at the present time not in Russia's interest, but not only that, but it's a security challenge to Russia. And they are all unfounded. There was no genocide. There is no Nazification. There have been in Ukraine, certainly, right-wing people, and there has been some anti-Semitism, and Ukraine is not perfect. It has got its own problems. But these reasons given by Nathan, not one of them has got any soundness to it. NATO and NATO's expansion has been a problem and challenge for Putin. And he wanted to make sure that as he started this war, that NATO would stop expansion. He thought, and his miscalculation was, that the West cannot be united. Germany always had a soft corner for Ukraine, for Russia, and that Germany would split, or at least Germany, along with some other countries, would take a stand. And that did not happen. Europe stayed united. United States did start its own leadership in the sense that although there was a thought that the United States no longer is there as a leader, I think in keeping this entire West together, I think the United States has played a pretty important role. So that is at the present setting. There are two countries, Finland, you have at the present time Sweden, and they have been wanting now to become part of NATO. And so we'll see how it all kind of plays out. Miscalculation on his part was threefold. One, that Ukraine would fold. Second, that the West is not going to be able to stay united. Third, that it has got a trump card, and that is that it has got energy. And because of that energy dependence by Europe on Russia, that Europe also, because of that, will not be able to stand it. And on all counts, he made a blunder, and at the present time, he's reaping the dividends of that. As you think about his motives, we obviously don't know what his motives are, but let's look back. And here the religious dimension comes in, because one of the analysts did say that it's the first religious war in the 21st century. And the religious dimension is the interpretation by some, including Putin, that Ukraine and Russia, that have been together, they are one people. They originated from Christian domination and Christian empire in the 10th century. And so they are one people, they are together, they are not separate, and that is the kind of idea and thought that Putin takes with him, and he feels that the time has come when again that Russian empire, including Ukraine, ought to be established. Let's go back very quickly in history. And you, again, know probably better than I do, 10th century, Christian kingdom, Ukraine and Russia together. Fast forward to the 15th century. In the 15th century, Constantinople fell to Ottoman invaders. And that time, Russian church said, we are the inheritors of the Russian Orthodox, and now Ukraine and all others ought to simply follow us. And all the parishes in Ukraine, then Russian church had complete jurisdiction over it. Fast forward until 1919. It is true that Russian kind of ruled Ukraine also, it was together. And then again moved forward, and what happened is that the Soviet Union came, and again Ukraine was part of it. Ukraine did start its own independent Ukraine Orthodox Church, and it did not have a great deal of affiliation. It did have affiliation, but separate in Ukraine. And then later on, after 1990, the Soviet Union collapsed, and at that time, Ukraine wanted to have its church totally separated and independent. And it asked Russian Orthodox Church to do that. They said no. And at that time, Ukraine itself started its own Ukraine Orthodox Church and on its own and separate from Russia. And then came 2018, 19, where Ukraine did to Constantinople that ecumenical responsibility for all those churches and said we need separation, and they were given independence. So that's the story. And amazingly, at the present time, Russian Orthodox Church and its own chief has been a very close confidant of Putin. And therefore, even in sermons, he has been talking about a spiritual fight, that it's not simply geopolitical, it is spiritual. And Putin has said that this flock that has gotten astray, an errant flock, we are going to bring it home and to the Russian church. So that is the kind of religious dimension that at the present time is there. And amazingly, in Ukraine, the Russian Orthodox Church and its own parishes, they have been about 11,000, and Ukrainians 8,000. But even all those parishes and those leaders in church, they have been talking about Russia and Russians' invasion as immoral, as illegal, and asking Russia to stop it. So that is the setting in which we find ourselves. Very briefly, when I mentioned that Ukraine war has shown Russia in its true colors, let's go back to 1945, the United Nations, the UN Charter, Russia being a permanent member of the Security Council, having a veto. No action could be taken by the United Nations without Russians' concurrence, or at least Russian not voting on the issue, abstention. But Russia has been, from 1945 on, been using veto more than any other country did. And on Syria, on many other issues, China and Ukraine, Russia has been using veto. And when on 24th February this year, Russia invaded Ukraine, then in the Security Council, obviously, there was a resolution put forward denouncing that aggression, because in the United Nations Charter, a very fundamental norm is no country can use force, military force, in order to invade another country, in order to use aggression. And there is a trigger for the Security Council to take action. And that trigger is that the Security Council decides if there is a breach of peace, if there is act of aggression, even there is a threat to peace. Under those circumstances, the Security Council can take any action. And in that cliché term, sky is the limit. Because the Security Council begins if there is an aggression. As you recall, Saddam Hussein went to Kuwait, and at that time, Security Council simply said that there is aggression and action can be taken against that. Because you begin in the United Nations by asking for ceasefire. You move on to diplomatic sanctions. You move on to ideological sanctions. Make that country that has used aggression kind of a pariah. Ask your diplomats to leave that country. Don't permit that country to fly their planes to your destination. Take economic sanctions, take trade sanctions, no armaments to be given. And then once all that fails, then you can use force, and any force. Although under international law, there is one very simple rule, and that is that on the use of force, military force, you must show two things. One, necessity, and second, proportionality. That there is a basic fundamental reason why you are using force, and it could be in self-defense, or it could be by the Security Council, but you cannot, as a country, use force in order to resolve any dispute. Dispute resolution can be resolved by arbitration, by adjudication, by conciliation, by any peaceful means that you want, but no use of force. And permanent member of the Security Council, Russia is the one that invades, unprovoked, Ukraine. So that fundamental basic norm in Article 2, Paragraph 4, is egregiously violated by Russia. And so after that Security Council resolution that Russia vetoed, and because of Russia's veto, no action could have been taken. But there was one, and then this is kind of technical, but it's important. In 1950, again because of Russia's veto, the United States had said that when the Security Council is paralyzed, let the General Assembly have some say, because under the UN Charter, General Assembly can simply make recommendations, cannot take any enforcement action. And so the thought was that Security Council cannot take action because of veto, then let the General Assembly do something. And that was called Uniting for Peace Resolution. And meaning thereby that General Assembly cannot take action, but General Assembly can make recommendations. And so this time, when the Security Council could not act, it was paralyzed, Russia's veto. At that time, in the Security Council, a resolution was adopted, let this General Assembly have a special emergency session. And that was in 1950 that was set up. Now that is a not substantive, but procedural decision. Veto cannot hold there. 9 members out of 15, once they vote on it, action can be taken. So the Security Council this time simply said Let the General Assembly move on it. So the General Assembly started moving on it. General Assembly took action. There is no Human Rights Commission, but there is now a Human Rights Council. Human Rights Council expelled, suspended Russia from its membership. And the General Assembly adopted a resolution, a very far-reaching resolution, that after a veto, General Assembly has a special session. And in that session, countries that have used veto should come and show the rationale for using it, so that accountability and that being fair and being open and transparent, that started in the General Assembly. So I simply want you to know that after this resolution in the Security Council was vetoed by Russia, General Assembly has now taken bold action on Russia, and I think continues to do that, but it cannot take enforcement action. It only can do recommendation, and it has made recommendations. I think I need to move a little faster, so let me move on to say that war crimes and crimes against humanity, they are committed daily by Russia. It has shelled, it has sent its missiles at civilians, it has done on churches, it has done in all kind of settings where people gather, and so many civilians have died because of that. And there is plenty of evidence. There are videos, there are all kind of witnesses. There have been human rights groups that have put together all kind of documents. And so there is plenty at the present time evidence. International Criminal Court, International Court of Justice, many countries in their own domestic tribunals, they are at the present time putting all that evidence together. So once that all evidence is there, the point simply is, what tribunals can take action? And here, domestic tribunals can take action under universal jurisdiction. Under international law, a country can have jurisdiction over a crime that is an international crime, but also a crime that is so abhorrent that the entire international community feels very, very strongly that it ought not to be tolerated. So at the present time, what Russia has done and what Russia has committed those crimes, there are war crimes, and these are Geneva Conventions, and they are very, very specific crimes. I won't go into them, but those war crimes are at the present time documented and very seriously put together evidence for that. And along with that, crimes against humanity, and this is civilians being targeted, people being killed, and as you probably have seen from Bucha to many other places, those graves where people are just dumped and killed. And there are even from Russia those prisoners of war that are executed. So there are plenty of those. Where do you bring action? And as I mentioned, International Criminal Court in The Hague is there. That is one international arena. Then I think there is European Court of Human Rights. There is at the present time in every country their own domestic courts, and they can have universal jurisdiction and take action against them. But also there is one difficulty, that on aggression, International Criminal Court cannot take action because its charges at the present time that it can go against, they are genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity. So the thought is that maybe a hybrid kind of court, international and domestic, can be put together specially in order to try aggression. And then the question comes, who is going to be targeted? And obviously those who committed crime, and then up the chain of command. And the chain of command can go to Putin. So can Putin be indicted? And the answer is yes. You got to simply show that Putin is the one that was responsible to some extent starting this crime of aggression. And then Putin is the one who either ought to know or did know that those crimes are being committed. So that is at the present time a setting that you find that on war crimes and crimes against humanity. I would not talk about genocide in that sense, although Biden has said genocide. Also, I know that Zelensky has said genocide. But genocide needs intent. Genocide is a pretty high threshold. Genocide simply means that either in whole or in part, a population is especially being targeted to be annihilated. And so I think that's a pretty high threshold. But even if there is no charge of genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity, plenty of evidence about them. So tribunals can be established, and tribunals are already existing, so he can be brought to trial. And finally, if I want to touch upon, where do we go? At the present time, to find some kind of a solution that is not by the use of force, but maybe you can have some mediators. Maybe Turkey has been doing a whole lot of work. France at one time did. India might be able to do that, because at the present time, Putin is isolated. There is no issue about it. As The Economist said last month, that even the elites in Moscow, in Russia, have been now asking a question that was never asked before. What after Putin? And there are people, crazies in Russia, hawks, who have been further egging on Putin, even to use nuclear weapons. And if not full-fledged, tactical nuclear weapon. And a tactical nuclear weapon would be simply targeted for a very specific area and not beyond that, and a small nuclear weapon. And I think from the West, especially the United States, and also Western countries, there has been to Putin a warning, many times repeated, don't go there. Once you start it, you know that Russia would be totally devastated. There is at the present time plenty of those nuclear weapons there are with other countries, and there would be absolutely no doubt about it that these countries would then use those weapons against Russia, and Russia would be totally devastated. So at the present time, the question simply is, if Putin goes, because the war is coming home, although Putin keeps saying to others, look, it's a wonderful cause. We need to bring Ukraine and Russia together. We are one people. It's a spiritual dimension to war. And saying all that, and also to mothers recently, mothers of children, those recruits, because he had 300,000, those special recruits. And as you know, at the present time, he is not using that as a war. He says it's a special kind of military operation. But in any event, at the present time, in Russia, young people have left, many of them, hundreds of thousands, in different places, from Georgia, where they can go without a passport, and without any identity papers, and even in other countries. So at the present time, isolated, losing the war, not having reached its own ambitions, that dream of an empire, Russian Empire, or the Soviet Union that was there, that dream having been shattered, what happens next? And I think one thing we do know is that the person who is going to come next, we don't know about him or her. And we don't know what kind of policies that person is going to undertake. But we can't be sure that things are going to be normal, because this is the new normal that has happened. So under these circumstances, although we don't know what's going to happen, we do know that at the present time, still West is there, providing economic help, providing military assistance in order to see that Ukraine can sustain itself. Ukraine is totally defiant even now in light of all these hardships. Winter is coming, electricity, water, power, not there. And still they are saying, we have an identity. We are independent. We don't want to be ruled by you. And that message has got loud and clear to Russia. So what tomorrow is going to bring, we don't know. Diplomatic efforts at the present time don't seem to be there a whole lot, because at the beginning of the war, as you remember, Ukraine and Russia did have some exchanges, some talk, and even today there are people who are saying, now the time has come where probably Russia can say it has taken a little bit of east, and Ukraine can at least say that it has gotten counteroffensive and succeeded to some extent. So maybe at the present time, the time is coming that they might have some kind of effort to reconciliation or at least ceasefire, but we don't know where we stand at the present time. Delighted to be with you. I'm looking forward to hearing from you. I did not have the watch with me, so I don't know how much time I have taken. But let me stop here and let me hear from you. And today's propaganda today, as Marijo rightly mentioned, it's on climate change. And I think I might mention one thing about that climate change, that although it was a mixed result, there was no effort in order to expedite and to further cut those emissions. But one thing happened, and that had been a cry from developing countries for 3 decades. And they were saying, we are suffering. We did not cause any of this problem. We don't have emissions even now. And you who are doing all those emissions, because of you, the sea is rising. A small island like ours, as these island people are saying, it will be inundated. We need to go somewhere else. And so they are saying that for loss and damage, that at the present time we are suffering, we need help, we need aid. And for the first time, United States had not been eager to do that because it thought it might put it on liability scale, and so it did not want to go that route, but the United States finally agreed. And at this time, the summit decided that there is going to be compensation. There are some who have called it reparation, others who have called it compensation. But the United States and the West would simply say it's loss and damage, and in order to ensure that that loss and damage is taken care of, we are giving them aid. But that is one bright feature of this current summit. Otherwise, all that had happened in Glasgow last year, it's the same story and nothing more than that. And the sad part about it is that 1.5 degrees Celsius, that was the kind of upper limit after which it was thought that we would have all those kind of storms and droughts and rising seas and problems, and they will be accentuated. But unfortunately, that 1.5 is not going to probably happen. Currently, we are at 1.1 degrees Celsius already. And as you probably know, at 3-4 times the normal rate is in the Arctic at the present time, melting. Glaciers are melting, all those problems are there. So I think all that I want to mention to you is that we are in trouble unless action is taken now and expedited now. So let me stop here. I want to thank you very, very much for always being so kind and generous and gracious with your time and with your patience. Thank you very much. Thank you.
I think we have about 10 minutes for questions. Because this is live streamed, I'd like to get a mic to you. So just raise your hand if you have a question, and I will. You? Yes? Oh. Yeah, just here we go.
I have 20 questions, but I'll try to limit to one and just note as well that the issues of action on climate are very connected to the issues we see around Russia's aggression. And I hope you can hear me up there. But I mean, and that connection is around, where energy is coming from, access to material like nickel for the energy transition that has come from Russia and is now being considered to be sourced from Indonesia and other countries. But my question is around the UN, because you know more about the development of the UN over the many generations than anyone else I know. And one person we love in this church is Brené Brown, and we talk about, the difference of power with and power over. And I wonder what you think about the role of the Security Council now, if you think it needs to be reformed, and if you see it as a model of power over or a model of power with. And along the same lines, where in the UN do you think bodies should continue to pursue decision-making by consensus versus moving, even where that's been traditional but not required, versus moving toward voting when there's a member like Russia that can veto and won't ever be in consensus, or leaders from the US. So I'm curious about those things.
Well, thank you very much. I think the Security Council certainly needs to be reformed, but the sad part about it is that all these efforts at reforming Security Council, whether to increase the numbers, whether to take the veto off, all those require a Security Council action, and any member can veto it, so no decision can be taken on that count. So I think only incremental, gradual progress can be made on that count. And so instead of Security Council, the shift of power to the General Assembly, where there are 193 countries, is a possibility, and that is the bright spot that the General Assembly might be able to do that. The sad part about General Assembly is that it's simply a talking body. It can make only recommendations, and there are 193 countries there. And so I think the difficulty of action there is paramount. So I think at the present time we are kind of stuck, and I hope that some way can be found in order to be able to make decisions, challenges that the world is facing, whether environmental, whether climate, whether at the present time war and peace issues, internal conflicts. Look at all these places, Syria, Ethiopia, Congo, all over. And so that is where we are. But the problem simply is that we cannot surrender. And I teach international law. And unless I was an optimist, and unless I was one of those people who always thinks that tomorrow a new dawn is going to rise, I cannot continue that. And I'm very happy to continue doing it. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Thank you, Dr. Vanda. I do think there's something else going on here. I think that if you look at history over the last 200 years, countries generally have a reign of about 80 years in which their currency, their military, their economy is dominant. I think the Russians recognize, along with the Chinese, that this is kind of their moment. I mean, when we talk about the West, we're talking about it from our perspective. There are values. They're not universal. And I think as Americans, we have to acknowledge that there's different ways of seeing the world. It concerns me greatly that, for example, the United States sees one possible solution to the conflict in Ukraine to add to NATO, when we ourselves in the 1960s insisted that Khrushchev remove missiles from Cuba. So we have to take the perspective of we're going to have to make compromises in the best interest of the global community, not necessarily in an idealistic way. My question to you is, what do you think is going to change in the Ukraine conflict that's going to force a resolution? Because it doesn't seem like there's a clear driver. It seems like all the parties have actually a vested interest, with the exception of the Ukrainians themselves, in keeping kind of this situation status quo. What do you think is going to change that?
I don't know what's going to change that, but I think the point simply is that Ukraine, as you know, had said at the very beginning, before even the war, that it's going to stay non-aligned. It's not going to become a part of NATO. And therefore, the thought simply was that based upon that, maybe Russia was not going to continue doing all that, but it did continue. And at the present time, what is going to change all that? I think at the present time, the United States and European countries, they are recognizing that in order to bring about a change, there has to be some kind of effort on their part. And I don't know how that compromise is going to happen, but it has to, because there is no choice.
I think we have time for one more question, if there's somebody who wants to raise their hand. You guys are a quiet bunch today.
Mary Jo, it was so clear that nobody has any questions.
Yeah, yes, that was.
Mine's more of a theoretical question on the just war theory. Does Putin think that he is in a just war? You mentioned that a little bit, but I'm just curious. And does he also think that his actions are just in the war that he started?
You know, you all probably know just war theory. It's simply that there is a good rationale for undertaking that the cause is just, that the force is proportionate, that the outcome is going to be proper, and that is what we are doing it. Now, Putin did feel that its security was in danger. And Putin did say that because of that, it's in self-defense that it has got to take that action. But the facts do not support that rationale. So Putin's thinking about just war is just like Trump thinking that he has declassified all the documents. So I think thinking doesn't do the trick. And so Putin might say it's just war, but what Putin really is thinking, based upon all that he has said, is he's looking at that old empire, Russian Empire, and the dream of that empire again to be established. And if that empire is not there, then at least the kind of Soviet Union with all that influence, from Moldova to all those small countries, and there are Russian ethnic groups there, and we ought to see that they are all part of our own tribe together. So I think the just war theory on his part, he might say it, but facts do not support it.
Dr. Nanda, thank you so much for joining us today. It has been a pleasure.
But thank you. And I want to thank you especially for being patient, for being so kind to hear, and later on also, if there is anything that you did not agree with and you've got your own comments, please do say them. I deeply appreciate it. Thank you very much.